In the early hours of February 24th, 2022, the world woke to the sound of explosions over Ukraine. Russian missiles struck airports, military bases, and cities from Kyiv to Kharkiv. Families rushed into underground shelters, traffic jams clogged highways leading west, and a new war, the largest in Europe since World War II, had begun. The Russian president, Vladimir Putin, called it a special military operation. But to Ukrainians and to much of the world, it was nothing less than a full-scale invasion. To understand how this war started, we must look back at the long and complicated history between Ukraine and Russia. Both nations trace their origins to the medieval state of Kievan Rus, founded over 1,000 years ago with Kiev at its heart. Over the centuries, Ukraine came under the control of powerful empires, Poland, Austria-Hungary, and, most significantly, Russia. In the Soviet era, Ukraine became one of the most important republics, rich in farmland, coal, and heavy industry. But Soviet rule brought tragedy too. During Stalin's policies of the early 1930s, a man-made famine known as the Holodomor killed millions of Ukrainians. Later, during World War II, the land was devastated by Nazi and Soviet armies, leaving deep scars that would last generations. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine declared independence. For the first time in centuries, it was free to choose its own path. Yet Russia never fully accepted this loss. Ukraine's independence meant not only the separation of a key republic, but also the loss of influence, ports, and resources that Moscow had relied on. In the 1990s, Ukraine gave up its massive nuclear arsenal, the third largest in the world, in exchange for security guarantees in the Budapest Memorandum, a deal signed by Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Russia pledged to respect Ukraine's borders. But history would show that promise was never kept. Throughout the 2000s, Ukraine's politics swung between pro-Western and pro-Russian leaders. Mass protests in 2004, known as the Orange Revolution, stopped election fraud that had favored a Moscow-backed candidate. A decade later, in 2014, protests again erupted in Kyiv's Maidan Square when President Viktor Yanukovych rejected a trade deal with the European Union under pressure from Moscow. After deadly clashes, Yanukovych fled, and Ukraine turned decisively toward Europe. The Kremlin reacted with force. In March 2014, Russian troops annexed Crimea, a move condemned internationally. In eastern Ukraine, Russia fueled separatist uprisings in Donetsk and Luhansk. A grinding war followed, killing more than 14,000 people before 2022. The seeds of a larger conflict had been sown. From 2014 to 2021, Ukraine sought closer ties with NATO and the EU, while Russia built up its military and issued increasingly aggressive warnings. Putin claimed Ukraine was not a real country and accused the West of turning it into a base against Russia. In late 2021, satellite images showed tens of thousands of Russian troops gathering near Ukraine's borders. Western intelligence agencies warned of an impending invasion, but many doubted it would truly happen. Yet on February 24th, 2022, those doubts vanished. Russian forces advanced from three directions: from Belarus toward Kyiv, from Russia toward Kharkiv and the Donbass, and from Crimea in the south. The plan was clear: overwhelm Ukraine quickly, capture the capital within days, and install a friendly government. But the plan failed. Ukrainian resistance proved far stronger than Moscow expected. At Hostomel Airport near Kyiv, elite Russian paratroopers were destroyed in a daring defense that denied Russia a crucial air bridge. In the suburbs of Kyiv, civilians joined soldiers in building barricades, mixing Molotov cocktails and blocking tanks with their own bodies. President Volodymyr Zelensky, who had once been a comedian and actor, refused to leave the capital. His words to Western allies, "I need ammunition, not a ride," rallied his nation and made headlines across the globe. By April 2022, Russian forces were forced to withdraw from Kyiv and northern Ukraine, having suffered heavy losses. But their retreat revealed horrors. In towns like Bucha, mass graves and bodies of civilians showed evidence of executions and torture. The world was shocked, and the word Bucha became synonymous with war crimes. Russia then shifted its focus to the east and south. The battle for the port city of Mariupol turned into one of the war's darkest chapters. For nearly 3 months, the city was bombed relentlessly. Tens of thousands of civilians were trapped without food, water, or electricity. The Azovstal steel plant became a last stand, where Ukrainian defenders held out in underground bunkers until May. Mariupol was reduced to ruins, but it became a symbol of defiance. In the summer and autumn of 2022, the tide began to turn again. With advanced Western weapons such as HIMARS rocket systems, Ukraine launched counteroffensives. In September, its forces liberated most of the Kharkiv region in a stunning advance. In November, they recaptured Kherson, the only regional capital Russia had managed to seize. For the first time since the invasion began, Ukraine had regained momentum. But the war was far from over. By 2023, the front lines hardened, and the conflict became a war of attrition. The Battle of Bakhmut, a city in the Donbass, turned into the bloodiest fight of the war. For months, Russian forces, including mercenaries from the Wagner Group, hurled wave after wave of attacks. By May 2023, Russia claimed the destroyed city, but at catastrophic cost. Meanwhile, Russia launched waves of missile and drone strikes on Ukraine's energy grid, plunging cities into darkness through the freezing winter. The war spread beyond Ukraine's borders in other ways. Europe faced an energy crisis as it cut dependence on Russian oil and gas. Food supplies were disrupted, threatening famine in parts of Africa and Asia. NATO expanded, with Finland joining in 2023 and Sweden following in 2024, abandoning neutrality after decades. The global balance of power shifted. The West grew more united against Russia, while Moscow leaned toward China, Iran, and others willing to defy sanctions. The human cost, however, is the heart of this war. Millions of Ukrainians fled their homes, creating the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. By late 2023, over 8 million were displaced abroad. Cities like Mariupol, Severodonetsk, and Bakhmut were left in ruins. Families were separated, children deported, and war crimes documented. The suffering is immeasurable, and the scars will last for generations. As the war entered its third year, the future remained uncertain. Ukraine pressed for more Western weapons, including modern tanks and fighter jets, while Russia dug in, betting that time and fatigue would erode support for Kyiv. Peace talks seemed distant, with both sides unwilling to compromise on territory. The world watched anxiously, knowing that the outcome could reshape not just Europe, but the entire global order. The invasion of Ukraine is not only a story of tanks and missiles. It is a story of sovereignty, democracy, and the right of a nation to decide its future. From the rubble of Mariupol to the streets of Kyiv, from the frozen trenches of the Donbass to refugee camps across Europe, this war has redrawn the map of international politics. And while its ending remains unwritten, one thing is clear: Ukraine's resilience has already changed history.